It was early 2004 when the quiet suburban life of the Jensen family in Minnesota seemed to unravel overnight. Richard Jensen, the husband and father, was well-liked by neighbors and friends, a charming man in his mid-40s with a steady job, a loving wife, and 2 teenage kids. He appeared to be the ideal family man. But beneath this picture-perfect exterior, Richard had been hiding a web of lies so intricate that even the FBI would be deceived. Richard's story starts innocently enough. Born into a modest family in a small town, he had always been ambitious. His charm and ability to connect with people made him a natural in business. By his mid-30s, he had worked his way up to a high-level position at a well-known insurance firm. He provided for his family in ways that seemed beyond his means: extravagant vacations, private school tuition for the kids, and a sprawling house that stood out in their middle-class neighborhood. His wife, Martha, adored him. She had always known Richard to be a bit of a risk-taker, but trusted that he had everything under control. After all, he was the man who could talk his way into or out of any situation. But there were whispers of something darker, rumors among his colleagues that Richard's success wasn't just due to his charm and business acumen. No one could quite put their finger on it, but the numbers in his department never seemed to add up. The first real clue that something was wrong came in the spring of 2004, when a neighbor, who also happened to work at the same insurance firm, mentioned over drinks that Richard's name had been brought up in an internal audit. Martha laughed it off, confident that her husband would never do anything illegal. But when Richard came home that night, his mood was different. He was tense, short-tempered, and evasive when she asked about his day. Weeks passed, and Richard's behavior grew more erratic. He would leave the house for work, but sometimes return hours later, claiming to have forgotten something, only to disappear again. Martha found herself making excuses for him to their children, who were starting to notice their father's odd behavior. What was once a solid, loving household was beginning to crumble. Then came the phone calls. It started with one call from an unknown number, which Richard answered abruptly before stepping outside to talk in hushed tones. Over the following days, these calls became more frequent, and Richard's behavior even more secretive. Martha's suspicions grew, but she convinced herself it was stress from work. By summer, it became impossible to ignore. A letter arrived, addressed to Richard but marked urgent. Martha, knowing she shouldn't, opened it. Inside was a brief message from a law firm she didn't recognize, asking Richard to call them immediately. It was signed by an attorney specializing in financial fraud. When Richard came home that evening, Martha confronted him. His face, normally smooth and composed, turned pale. For the first time in their marriage, he didn't have an answer. Instead, he muttered something about a misunderstanding at work and promised it would all be cleared up soon. But as the weeks passed, the situation only worsened. One morning, just as the children were leaving for school, 2 men in dark suits showed up at the front door. FBI agents. Martha froze as Richard casually invited them in, as if this were a routine meeting. The agents asked Richard to come with them to answer a few questions downtown. He complied without protest, telling Martha it was all a formality. As the agents led him away, he didn't look back. Hours turned into days, and Martha heard nothing. Her calls to Richard's office were met with confusion. He hadn't been at work for weeks. Panic set in. Had her husband been lying to her all along? Who was the man she had shared her life with for over 2 decades? Days later, a news report revealed the shocking truth. Richard Jensen had been the subject of a 2-year FBI investigation, and he was now in custody on charges of embezzling millions of dollars from the insurance firm where he worked. But that wasn't the most shocking part. Richard had been leading a double life. Unknown to Martha, her husband had been funneling money into offshore accounts under a false identity. He had been traveling frequently, not for work as he claimed, but to oversee the construction of a lavish mansion in the Caribbean, a mansion meant for him and another woman, someone Martha had never heard of. This woman, younger and glamorous, had been under the impression that Richard was a wealthy businessman unattached to any family or obligations. The FBI's investigation had begun when discrepancies in Richard's financial reports raised red flags within the company. But it was his suspicious overseas transactions that had alerted federal authorities. For months, they had been monitoring his every move, waiting for the right moment to arrest him. In the days that followed his arrest, the media descended on the Jensens' home. Reporters swarmed their quiet neighborhood, eager to get a glimpse of the family left behind in the wake of Richard's betrayal. Martha, devastated, refused to speak to the press. She couldn't bring herself to face the fact that her husband, the man she had loved and trusted, had been living a lie. As the court proceedings began, more details about Richard's double life emerged. He had been siphoning funds from his company for nearly 5 years, carefully hiding his tracks with forged documents and false identities. The money he had stolen wasn't just for his lavish Caribbean getaway. He had also invested in high-stakes gambling, losing millions in the process. Martha and her children were left penniless, their accounts frozen as the FBI worked to recover the stolen funds. The life they had known, the vacations, the private schools, the beautiful house had all been built on lies. The trial lasted for months, with witnesses from Richard's company testifying to the extent of his fraud. His colleagues, once charmed by his charisma, now described him as a master manipulator who had fooled everyone around him. The FBI revealed that Richard had gone to extraordinary lengths to maintain his facade, even forging passports and creating fake companies to launder the money. As the trial drew to a close, Richard sat silently in the courtroom, showing no emotion as the evidence against him mounted. When the guilty verdict was finally read, Martha felt a mixture of relief and despair. Her husband had been sentenced to 25 years in federal prison, but the man she had known was already gone. The Richard she had loved had never truly existed. In the years that followed, Martha and her children struggled to rebuild their lives. The media eventually moved on, but the scars of Richard's betrayal remained. The community that had once admired the Jensen family now viewed them with pity and suspicion. Martha never spoke to Richard again after his sentencing, choosing instead to focus on her children and their future. But the question that lingered in everyone's mind, the one that haunted Martha late at night, was how Richard had managed to fool everyone for so long. How could a man live a double life, deceiving not only his family but the FBI for years? It was a mystery that would never be fully solved, a testament to the power of deception and the darkness that can hide behind even the most charming smile. And so, the story of Richard Jensen, the husband who fooled everyone, became a cautionary tale, a true crime story that would be retold for years to come, an unsettling reminder that sometimes the person you trust the most is the one hiding the darkest secrets.